Today I just want to do a very quick video about wagglers. Got a fair selection here, and I just want to talk to you about the options for how you attach the waggler to the line. If we go back 50 years, people simply whipped an eye on the bottom of the stem. Some wagglers that had balsa bodies had like a barbed eyed hook that was straightened out. These were actually made straight, so they never bent them, pushed and glued into the bottom of the float. Or you can just take a very simple wire eye. With all of these I'll show a close-up, and whip it on, varnish it over the whip-in, and you just thread the line through the ring, put some locking shot either side, away you go. Of course you can have a loaded float, so instead of a piece of cane in the bottom you can have a piece of brass, or you can wind lead wire around the base of the float to make it self-cocking and load it that way, and then just have very small shot either side of the eye. The advantage of that, it's very simple, it's idiot proof, the eye's not going to come off, it certainly shouldn't do, and there you go. But the disadvantage is that if you want to change the float, you've got to break the line, thread on another float, shot that float up, which doesn't take that long if you've got floats that are marked up with their shot in, but that's the big disadvantage. Back in the 1970s, Kevin Ashurst didn't like this idea of having to break down the line. He wanted to change floats, and what he did was to take bits of cable plastic, sort of casing of electrical wire, and burn a hole through it, and then just push it onto the bottom of peacock quills, which were slightly rolled in your fingers to put a slight tape on it, just push them on. And I did exactly that same thing 45 years ago, but it was a bit crude. It did work, I didn't lose any floats, I could change floats. But people came along and they thought, we can do better than that. And we started to get float adapters. A float adapter like this one, you have, instead of the peacock has a cane peg, a 3mm cane peg glued into it, and then you have a piece of silicone rubber that then goes over a piece of plastic that's moulded with an eye through it, and you can take that, will come off, and you can push it on, put a different float in, and so on. It means you've got to buy lots of float adapters. It has to be slightly wet to push it on, and then you just push it on again, and there you go. So you've got a method of changing it. The advantage is you can change floats. The disadvantage is sometimes these destruct. The silicone rubber can split or break, you lose the float, or they can come off occasionally. They shouldn't come off. A slight improvement on that is ones made by Drennan that use like half a barrel swivel. So you've got the eye of the swivel there. Again, the silicone rubber fairly nice and tight, and it means the float will turn against the line, so it may stop it twisting a bit. There's a little tiny bit of give as well. It does flex a tiny bit, so when you strike it will flex ever so slightly, not very much. So these are the most commonly used types of adapters, and probably Drennan are one of the few that do them. I used to have some ones that I bought in Bournemouth that were very good. I've got very few left. I've lost them with the floats over time. But you need lots of these. If you've got lots of wagglers, well, you can say, well, I'm going to put one adapter on and put different floats, but you need plenty of them, and I like to have my floats all ready to go. So I'd need a lot of adapters for that method, but it does work. Around about, trying to think when this was, 40 years ago, or was it 30 years ago? When I fished the Witham one of the times, someone who tortoise. I'm trying to think who on earth it was. It might have been 1990 on the with them, Roger Downing, and he said what you want to do was put the cane peg on there and then whip an eye on there, and you can use thick fishing line like 10-pound line as the ring, and then a very small swivel on there, and you put the line through the bottom of the swivel. Again, it can turn, but so when you strike it folds. You've got that folding going on there, and that just impedes the strike just a little bit less. The disadvantage, you've obviously got to rig your floats up like this, whip on the eyes. Like I say, you can use a bit of fishing line and a little bit of brass wire. You need these little tiny swivels. They can be pretty small. It does work beautifully. They're not quite so accurate. If you want really accurate casting to a far bank somewhere, they don't cast quite the same. If you're just fishing in the middle of an open bit of water like the River Witham, they're fine. They'll cast fine because you sort of overcast coming. But when you want to get it absolutely accurate, it seems to lose that accuracy for distance casting. So I like a few floats like this for fishing in open water. Often when I'm fishing quite delicate with a 1.5 Maxima. And yeah, definitely worth doing a few. Of course, the disadvantage, you've got to fix all your floats up like this. You can't change floats without breaking down the tackle, so that's the big disadvantage. I do like that on a few floats as an alternative. And bear in mind, I'm pleasure fishing nowadays, so if I decide to change floats, I'm not losing time like I would in a match. But even then, I've always been pretty fast at tackling up, so it wouldn't bother me that much. An alternative to that last one, which sort of combines two things, is to put an eye on the bottom of the float and then use a link swivel. So you've got a little swivel there, and then you've got a little clip, and you can unclip that from there. That comes off there, and we can take that off. So we can change floats still. Put that back on. Do need an eye that's big enough to get the link swivel on. It doesn't have to be very big. It does fold on the strike, as with the ordinary swivel, probably even looser. It's a little bit more to tangle up there, a little bit more hardware if you like, but it is a workable solution that some people like. I'm not a great fan of this one. I'd prefer to go the whole hog with a swivel on its own eye, or a standard swivel float adapter. And sometimes I do use floats just with an eye on. This is a MIDI float that's already got a moulded plastic eye instead of a cane base to it. It doesn't bother me using ones with an eye on it sometimes, especially if I know the swim, it's a swim where I'm going to fish in a certain way. And one aspect of saying about changing floats, in the days when I've seriously match fished and you thought there might be alternatives needed on the waggler, set up more than one rod. You might have a big waggler and then something much lighter or smaller for fishing it. So this might be right out in the swim. Say you were fishing on the Nene with a waggler, you might use a great big waggler like that, and then to fish just over the near side shelf, apart from the pole of course, you might use a much smaller waggler, so very different float, just taking a couple of BB, a few number 8s, whereas this thing would take 2.5 Swan. Very different approach. So I've given you a few choices there. There's no overall favourite, but think about the alternatives, how you want to fish with them, what each will give you or take away, and hope I've got you as ever thinking a bit. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.